Okay, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our first Friday webinar for July. We're very excited to have a special guest presenting today, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a second. Before I do, just a couple of quick announcements for you. NWACUHO is still actively recruiting a representative for Alberta. It is a fantastic opportunity that will make you rich and famous all over the world, maybe. And so it's well worth looking at. So if you're interested in that, please email me past-prez@northwestcuho.org. And if any questions or anything like that would be great. For those who have tuned in to our first ever webinar via YouTube Live, if you're viewing this on the NWACUHO website, you can actually click view on YouTube, and that'll take you to the YouTube broadcast itself, where there will be a live chat feature. So we'll be monitoring that for any questions or anything that you have. That about sums up the announcements I have for today. So this webinar will be recorded and shared on our YouTube channel. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Justin Leibowitz, our guest speaker for today. Take it away, Justin, and thank you for presenting today.
Thank you very much, Craig. I appreciate it. And good morning, good afternoon to everybody out there. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. I'm really excited to be a guest at NWACUHO, and I'm real excited to talk to you about online training. I am going to shift over to our PowerPoint. And so this will probably be the last you're seeing of my smiling face. But thanks again for being here. And let's talk a bit about online training. So again, my name is Justin Leibowitz. I am the Associate Director of Residential Life at the University of Louisville, and we're going to talk about online training and kind of how do we do that. And so one of the things I want to emphasize is I'm going to use the University of Louisville as an example, and I'm going to use that for some context about what we've done at U of L. But if nothing else, I want to emphasize that I believe online training is something that you can utilize at just about any institution, independent of what your resource access is, independent of the size of the school, the size of the staff, to leverage these tools. And so I want to invite you now at the beginning, and I'll invite you again at the end to consider me a colleague, a friend, a resource. And if you want to work together and problem solve to see what we can do to help make this available for your team, I am happy to offer the assistance that I can. Please know that I am a specialist in residential life. I'm not an AV specialist. I'm not an online learning specialist, but it is something I'm passionate about. It's something I care about. And so I'm always excited to share information. So what are we going to talk about today? Talk a little bit about our outcomes. What are we trying to do? Talking about online training practices in the room. So if there are any folks out there just to be thinking about what do you do currently? So if, I don't know who's represented in your rooms, but just being aware, even if you have folks from different parts of your team, facilities, res life, assignments, is anybody doing online training right now? Talking about the perceptions of online training, the realities of online training, material for online training, tools for online training, and then the process for creating online training. And so that's the workflow we're looking at today, and I'll find a few minutes also just to share with you what it looks like here at U of L. Not that that's right or best, it's what we use. What we want to accomplish today. First of all, I want to help you just get to a place where you feel comfortable categorizing material into our online and face-to-face training groups, because there's some stuff that very clearly belongs in face-to-face training. There's some stuff that may very clearly belong in online. And there's a lot of stuff in the middle that you have to think a little bit more about how you're presenting, what you're presenting, and what methods you have access to. I'll introduce you to some tools, resources, and again, the workflow for how I create online materials here at University of Louisville with my team, and some of those tools may be applicable for you as well as some tools that I don't necessarily use but may be helpful for your team. And then I hope that you're going to walk away with at least one topic that you feel like you can develop into online training for the future. I recognize we're in July. Most of us are gearing up for training in August, some folks a little bit later, and so now may not be your time. But this could be the opportunity to take a bold first step. And even if you're just getting introduced to it, gives you an opportunity to plan for the future. So normally when I'm with folks and we're at a conference, I get to ask folks around the room, what are your perceptions? And given that we're in more of the online environment, that may be a little more challenging with the chat tools. And so these are some of the perceptions I hear a lot about online training. I hear that it's boring. I hear that it can be convenient. I hear that it can be efficient. Sometimes it's unhelpful. A lot of conversation about its accessibility. It could be inflexible and a number of other things. And I encourage you, if you're in a room with other folks, to be thinking about what are your own perceptions about online training or online learning. And chances are there's no answer that's wrong, because there's a lot of different ways to do it. And some people have more skill with it. Some people have less. And sometimes the material impacts what the experience is as well. So some of the realities of online training, not just here at the University of Louisville, but more broadly, what I would say is it's not perfect for all things and all people. There are definitely some topics that work really well, and there are definitely some people who really like it and some people who don't like it as much. It can work though, and so one of the things that I've heard a number of times as I've presented on this, whether at a NWACUHO or CHO or CAHO, is the conversation about the retention of material. And we could have a long conversation about the literature and what it tells us about online learning and online training. And certainly there's some evidence that while it may not outpace face-to-face learning, it is not inherently by definition worse than face-to-face learning. And what I also talk to my colleagues about to think about is to make sure you are not holding your online training program to a higher standard than you hold your face-to-face training program. Most of our online training is geared around our resident assistants, but we also use it for some of our desk staff, so our community hall assistants, and some of our other staff, even our facilities and in our office staff, have material that they can review as well that can be helpful for them. And what I would say is, having done years of training, like many of you on this presentation, we know that face-to-face training can be really challenging because when you get 60, 70, 80, 90 people together in a room or more, how do you know everyone's paying attention? How do you know everyone's retaining information? And so sometimes when we talk about moving to online training, there is a fear about the retention of information. And what I will always offer to folks is to be thinking about, are you able to speak thoughtfully to the retention of information in face-to-face training? And if you can, that's fantastic. And let's hold that same standard to online training as well. If you're not doing that, then one, I think that's an opportunity that you can pursue for growth to figure out is being retained face-to-face compared to online. But sometimes in that aversion to this different method, we may hold online training to a different standard. And so I encourage folks to be thinking about that. One of the great benefits is that it can be reused. And so yes, you can put in some front-end work that takes a little bit of extra time, but it does have the opportunity to be reused. So if you need to hire an RA in October, or you need to hire a desk worker in October, or a facility assistant in November, you have these materials, they are ready to go. And so all you have to do is give that student access, and you have reduced the amount of material that you need to review with them together. And that doesn't mean you don't care about them. It means you can prioritize your very limited time on things that may be more important or may require face-to-face communication more so than what you did online. Offer a lot of easier assessment options. So you know that they're already online, you know that you can link an assessment directly to your online training, depending on what platforms you're using, or because they're already in that medium, they may be more comfortable moving over to another website, another email, or something like that to be able to complete the assessment. What I will say is it doesn't typically allow for subpar planning. And so I've been at many institutions, and I'm sure most people around the viewership can speak to, oh gosh, it's June, it's July, we need to talk more about RA training, or we need to talk more about our desk training. Because life happens, conferences happen, closing happens. And so while with the best of intent, we're trying to get that early start, sometimes that doesn't happen. And it can be a little bit easier to recover when you're doing your training face-to-face. Online training does not typically offer you the same flexibility, and you oftentimes are gonna feel the consequences of not having the time to get your training where you want it to be. One big part, and I'd be curious for folks who are watching, this may be a part of your conversation. It can save some real money and some real time. And so for us, as we've been implementing our program, we are shifting from our traditional RA training program of 2 weeks from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. So 10 days in total to 1 week. So 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., 5 business days. And for us, with us growing from 67 to 90 RAs, and us paying for 3 meals a day in addition to housing those people, financial savings for us. And I'm sure there are a lot of departments around the country who can relate to that need and that challenge. It has also allowed us to be more respectful of time, even the shift from getting to 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., where we can kind of finish the day at 6 and let our student staff have time to recover, have time to do some of the other things they need to work on without it being structured training time, has been really helpful. And I think we've seen a lot of positive feedback in terms of morale. And we're really excited for this year because we have a shorter training program. I think we're gonna have just a little bit higher morale as we get to opening and first floor meetings where they're just not quite as worn out. Flexibility as well. So if I am a student and I have an internship or a research opportunity during the summer and I'm not going to be able to come back for face-to-face training quite on time, they at least are not coming back as far behind as they could be, especially if it goes from missing 1 day of training to maybe missing no days, or missing 5 days to only missing 1 day because you've cut your training time down. It frees up time for other face-to-face trainings, and I think this is one of the most important pieces. When we talk about training, the thing I like to emphasize to people is your currency that you're trading on, in addition to the financial cost, your other currency is your face-to-face time. That is the most precious resource you have when you're building your team, is the time you have together to build relationships, establish norms, and do that face-to-face training. And so if you have to make a trade-off between something like behind closed doors and something that might be able to go online, I think most of us would want to utilize the online option to invest as much time and energy into those behind closed door experiences that we can. And finally, I want to acknowledge online training can, and I would say is, harder to develop than face-to-face training. You just don't have some of the benefits of being able to wing an online training. So if you maybe forgot about a detailed face-to-face training, you may be able to sort of adjust on the fly. It's a little harder to do in the middle of an online training. And so those are some of the realities I've experienced, I've heard many of my colleagues experience, and for those of you who are watching and listening, you may have different ones, and that's okay, of course. So some of the realities for U of L, and we implemented in fall 2016 our larger online training program, and then we're implementing a larger one this fall 2017. So this was the feedback we got for face-to-face training. And so this was about satisfaction. So you're going to see a pretty large group, a third of our RAs were extremely satisfied with their experience in their face-to-face training sessions. Another 45% were somewhat satisfied. We had a small group that were in the neither satisfied nor dissatisfied. I always call that the meh category, sort of the it was okay, I was there, I completed it. A little concerning for us, of course, is when we get folks who are dissatisfied. And while we're grateful to not have anyone who is extremely dissatisfied, we did have a few folks who were somewhat dissatisfied, and we take that seriously because we want to put the best product together that we can. With adding the online training, we have the opportunity to see how did people view their experiences of face-to-face and online. And before I get to the online, I do want to acknowledge there are different sessions that are being evaluated. And so it's not as if we did how to write an incident report in person and how to write an incident report online, and we have those apples to apples comparisons. And so that's certainly a flaw in what we're going to look at. But I think it's still important to see what was their experience in the online training. And so this is what we found. So we saw less extremely satisfied individuals. We still saw a pretty large somewhat satisfied. We saw a much larger group of people in that meh category, that category of like, it was okay, I did it. And then we did see a smaller portion of people in the somewhat dissatisfied population. And again, no one was extremely dissatisfied, which we were really happy with. And so for our first attempt at a larger online training program, we were reasonably happy with these results. The majority of people started moving toward the middle. And when we think about the material that we used for online training, that makes a lot of sense to us, because what we expect is a lot of the things that we move to online, they are things that are important, they need to be reviewed, but they are not necessarily the most engaging topics always, and they are not necessarily the things that resonate the most with our RAs about why they want to be RAs. They are very important administrative tools. They're not necessarily the things that speak to their heart about building community, helping people transition to college. That's not oftentimes the things we're talking about in the online environment, but the online environment is what allows us to invest more time in that for the face-to-face environment. So the breakdown, just for perspective on those two graphs, so we had the sessions evaluated 1 to 5, poor to excellent, using a rubric for comprehension and clarity of the presentation. So did they understand? Walk away with the information that they needed. And so for our face-to-face sessions, they averaged a 4.04, which we're very happy with. And in our online sessions, they averaged a 3.91. And so while that's lower, and while we did find a statistical significance difference there, we were still very happy with that. And part of the reason we were happy with that was, at the end of the day, it's about a 3% reduction. And if you ask me, am I willing to sacrifice 3% in perceived quality for the time savings, the cost savings, and the overall experience impact? My answer is yes. And that's a question you need to talk about in your department, with your team, kind of what are your values, what's important to you. But I think what online training allows for is to make that face-to-face experience even better, even more engaging, more exciting. so that you can really have people finishing that program very excited about opening, very excited about welcoming students to campus, and hopefully not quite as drained going up. And so from our perspective, we were really happy with these results. And so we are continuing to grow our online program. And we're also going to do more work to market to our RAs to help them understand what to expect before they get into the online training. So we know by design, some of our online training is some of the less engaging material. It's some of the stuff that needs to be reviewed and needs to be comprehended, but it may not be the most exciting stuff at times. And we can acknowledge that. There's no shame in it. And so I think the more that we can set those expectations for them, I think the more that they're going to be responsive to the content. So some material for online training. What have we found that works well? What have we found that's more challenging? On the working well side, you'll see things like introductory material. So if you're doing kind of vocabulary and definitions and just fundamental concepts that people need to know to move forward, that could be a great opportunity. So for example, I think many housing programs, you have your alphabet soup of organizations and terms. So what is a master key? What is RHA? What is the ADRL? What are all these titles? That could be a great place to start that takes you beyond just a worksheet for people to study and offers a little bit more engagement. But that's a great example of something where you can add some online material, add some assessment to it on just a worksheet without dedicating that precious time together in person to be reviewing glossary terms. When we talk about protocols, this is one where we spend a lot of time. We've built a lot of flowchart-based protocols for our student and professional staff to use. And so that's a lot of material that we've started to transition to online training, because that, one, gives people the opportunity to review the material multiple times. And so if they're navigating the nuance of an alcohol policy and they're trying to understand when can someone still take ownership of alcohol and when does it automatically get disposed, well, they can sit and listen to that explanation a couple of times if they need to, and they have the assessment built in immediately afterwards to test that knowledge and test that competency. In addition, when you bring new staff on in the middle of the year, they can immediately get familiar with protocols. And so when you bring them to campus to start the face-to-face training, they have some working knowledge already. And so that also allows us to avoid some of the pitfalls of, if you talk about completing a lockout, the information. You don't need to quickly digress to explain a lockout and explain a master key. They already heard what a master key is and they already heard how to complete a lockout. Similarly for policies, you have some of the same opportunities. So being able to direct people to the code of conduct and residence hall policies and any other policies such as consensual relationships or a progressive discipline guide, you can review that information in advance and still do more in person, but hopefully in person you're having more discussion about questions and nuance, and not immediately just explaining the policy for the first time. And what we have found to be really helpful is when we do this material in advance, we find fewer questions arrive on campus. We need to answer some of them by email or through a discussion board if we chose to use that option. And two, the more time our students have to sit with it, they're often able to answer their own questions, and they are often able to determine what is important for them to get answered and what is something that maybe is so detailed and nuanced that it may not be a question they actually need to ask. We also have the opportunity to address material that requires time for reflection. So talking about the staff progressive discipline guide, it's a policy piece, but it also, again, gives them an opportunity to reflect, and you can ask them to do that reflection or ask them to think of a few questions or think of some examples. And so whether it's that, you could do some work on diversity and inclusion. And so maybe you're sharing some videos and resources with them about the concept of implicit bias and giving them time to react to that, even in the privacy of their home potentially, to see how am I feeling, what are my initial reactions, and maybe you can help process that from afar, or you're able to engage them in that conversation further when they come back to campus. And again, this comes back to what you all decide is important for you to talk about in person and what you want them to think about in advance. And in this case, for diversity and inclusion, it just allows you the opportunity to go further overall because they come in with some of the initial material covered. Expectations are another one. So you can talk about customer service philosophy, your work environment philosophy. We have a video that's just about what are the expectations for training. So you're showing up rather than needing to address expectations potentially an hour and a half into your first day of training because you started with breakfast and then you started with a welcome and then you started with a team builder. So you might be 90 minutes or 2 hours into training. You can start off before they have ever even stepped foot to face-to-face training. The expectations are about, their phone usage, about, you're an adult, feel free to use the restroom as needed. Here's where you're going to find them in your training location. You can do a lot of that kind of work in advance. And so that's pretty exciting. What have we found to be more challenging? So live scenarios to practice are pretty tough for us. For anyone who's familiar with behind closed doors, where you're doing live scenarios of a party and you're addressing it as an RA, we don't personally have the technical skill sets in my team to build that type of material. We don't have the skill set to build something like Cognito, though we think it's a fantastic online tool. What I will say is if you are someone who on your campus or in your department, you have people who can build a tool like Cognito or an interactive tool that can simulate behind closed doors, don't ever let them leave. Do whatever you can to keep them on your team, because that's an amazing skill set. Specialized training. So if there are things that are potentially certified by an outside organization, they may not be okay with you doing online training, and so that kind of stops the conversation. But if you've never had the conversation, it might be worth asking. Perhaps you can break up the training and do some of it online and then do the meat of it in person. And even if that saves you 30 minutes or an hour, that could be really valuable in the long run. And then, of course, there are location-dependent trainings. So if you're talking about very specifically how to use a specific lock in a specific hall, it may just be easier to take the time and go with your staff and show them in that time, place, and moment, rather than trying to get all the details together to make an online video for it. It just depends on what your specific needs are. So there's a document that was shared in a Google Docs file or a Google Drive file that has sort of a worksheet that you are welcome to use. It is not necessarily groundbreaking. It's just I find it helpful to review. These are 4 questions that I posed, and I think if you can answer yes to 1 or more of them, then you have something that's a good candidate for online training. So first, is 51% or more of the material based on the use of the computer or web browser? If yes, then it's probably worth creating at least some component of an online training. Is the presentation housed in PowerPoint, Prezi, or a comparable tool? Again, there are a lot of tools to be able to make screencasts, to be able to make online videos. And so I would say you have another ideal option for making online training. And when you start reviewing this, you may find, wow, a lot of the training that we do areas, and perhaps we do have an opportunity to make some online training modules. Is 51% or more of the material based on review of manuals, job documents, procedures, protocols, policies, expectations, or introductory material like vocabulary or other comparable resources? That's a very large list of options, but if we're doing a lot of review, that oftentimes lends itself to either one of the 2 categories above or to a different category, a different presentation style, but you may still be able to do it online. And then finally, can you reorganize your material to be able to answer yes to questions 1, 2, or 3? So maybe you've always trained on a topic in a very specific way because that's what you needed to do. You had one presenter and they always needed 3 hours. Well, maybe you don't need that anymore. Maybe they can make a 1-hour video to cover a lot of the material, and then they need 45 minutes to cover the rest of it in person, depending on what the material is. So be aware when you're looking at old training schedules, you may have been holding on to, and I know I have encountered this, I was holding on to a structure that I didn't need to hold on to anymore. And so if you go to that worksheet on the PDF, you'll find that there are some questions you can consider, and really just sort of a worksheet to help you start to work through, how do I take this topic, which I believe is good for online training, and how do I get it to an end product? And so I hope that proves helpful. Talking about some tools for online training, for us at U of L, we focus very heavily on video-based materials. And so here's a list of things we tend to use, either PowerPoint or Camtasia. And so my preference is Camtasia. I find it to be a very friendly tool. There are other tools that aren't on here. Several of these are free or at least have freemium options. Jang is one that you can do, I believe, 5-minute videos at no cost. Screencast-O-Matic and Screencast.com have some options as well, and APowerSoft, I believe, has a free option as well. PowerPoint, of course, most of us have. You can do narrations on slides and then put it into a video. I would offer that if you have more than just a few-minute video, I find it's worthwhile to do the recordings of your PowerPoint in Camtasia or another comparable tool. I just find it to get a little clunky in PowerPoint. That's a personal opinion. Another one that can be popular is Adobe Captivate, and my experience with Adobe Captivate is it's extremely powerful. It's a very good tool. I found there to be a very high learning curve, and so because that is not my overall area of strength, is the Photoshop family, I found Camtasia to be much friendlier for me and for my team. looking ahead, so hosting videos, we host our videos on a private YouTube channel. That's just our preference. There are definitely other hosting options you can consider, but YouTube's great because it's free. For creating modules, we were very fortunate at U of L that we have a university license for SoftChalk. And so one of the first things that I did that I'll come back to is I reached out on our campus to figure out what resources existed. And so I started looking to see where do we have online learning already. And so we have online programs, academic programs, degree granting programs. And so when I started to investigate that, I found that we had tools that we had access to, and SoftChalk was one of those tools. And so it's great because it allows you to package your videos, your text, files, and really most other mediums you can think of into one overall tool, and then insert that tool into your hosting module, which for us is Blackboard. And so I've listed 3 learning management systems, Blackboard, Canvas, and Moodle, that all could be options for you as you're building online tools. And so when you think about your institution, the first place I would start is just checking to see what's your learning management system. Do you use Blackboard? Do you use Canvas or Moodle? Do you use something else, or do you not have one? And if you don't have one, that's okay, but that at least gives you an idea of what's available to start with. Then in terms of creating online training, you'll find this on the worksheet that's on Google Drive as well. This is our basic workflow. So we identify content, we create a video, we upload our video to our hosting location, which is YouTube. We create our modules in SoftChalk. We upload those modules to a hosting location, which is Blackboard. And then as important as any of this is that you're doing quality assurance testing, especially if you're having multiple people creating videos and it's not all coming from one source. Make sure the volume is reasonably in line with one another so that for the benefit of your users, they are not going from one video where the volume is really soft and then the next one, it feels like the volume's on high, and then the next one you can't hear again. It's one of those things that's going to hurt their experience in the long run. Through this process, this is kind of how it worked again at U of L, but I think you'll find these are the same kinds of questions you're going to ask yourself. So for us, identifying content, we start with, we want to know our outcomes. So what are we trying to do? And so when I work with our training team, that's what we're talking about. What things can we address in online training? What specifically are we trying to accomplish? And we really want to be strategic. So we don't have to keep things in the same order they used to be. So we can reassemble things in a way that may be more dynamic than we could do face-to-face because of the different presenters. And so there's some opportunities when you talk about incident reports and how conduct works and student care team and Title IX. Oftentimes we're accustomed to having a very linear progression where it's one presenter, then the next presenter, then the next presenter. You may be able to break all of that up and really through an example dynamically. So talking about responding to a Title IX related incident, how do you write the incident report? How do you respond to the incident? What are our requirements under Title IX? Okay, and then we immediately transition into talking about, well, what does it mean when we work with the student care team, and then talking about the student conduct process. And so you can work through that entire sample incident from a variety of avenues rather than talking about specific topical areas. We then create the video. So in U of L, we've been using Camtasia for the most part. And so one of the things I would encourage from an accessibility standpoint is starting with a script, and at minimum starting with an outline, but be thinking about what are the needs for your campus, not just now, but in the future. So if you have someone who may have a hearing impairment, for example, having a script so you can put that into closed captions, or at the very least put that into the video as a description or as an attached file, so that if someone needs a different accommodation, they have access to the material still, and you're not going back trying to fix that, because it can be really challenging to transcribe your videos and then insert those into the captions. Or see if you can borrow on campus a microphone. When you are doing recordings just directly off of your laptop, you're going to pick up a lot of noise around you. And I know for us, we're in an urban location. We have planes that fly overhead. The last thing somebody wants to hear when they're hearing the video is hearing the airplane fly over your head and drown out what you're trying to say. Advance, so limit your date specific items. So if you're talking about training expectations, if you think your training expectations are going to be reasonably consistent, then you may want to consider going ahead and eliminating any references to when you move in on August 6th, 2017, and maybe just saying when you have that usability year after year, and then when you need to replace the video, you replace the video. In addition, software like Camtasia, along with the microphone, are going to typically allow you for better video and audio, because Camtasia also gives you more editing tools than maybe just your average recording device. And so we have found it to be really helpful. And even though, again, audiovisual is not my area of expertise or knowledge, I've been able to learn reasonably quickly to do enough to get our training materials together. Videos. So again, we use a private unlisted setting for sharing our videos, which means you only can access it if you have the link. Worst case scenario, if we ever find that we need a new link, we can always just have it changed or replace the video. And so those are both pretty easy options for us. Continuing at U of L, what we do is we create our modules in SoftChalk. This is a great opportunity to have fun and be creative. This is where SoftChalk allows you an opportunity to incorporate assessments. And so some examples that we can use: multiple choice, multiple answers, true, false, ordering activities. You can have just a free text response as well. And this is where, again, thinking ahead and thinking strategically, thinking about the branding you want. And so this applies both to creating your module and creating your videos. So if you're going to use a PowerPoint, do you want your people to use one branded PowerPoint structure so that your institution name is there, so that everything kind of looks clean and slick? And I think the more you do that, both in your module and your videos, you're probably going to see some positive the perceived experiences of your students, because everything looks polished. Everything looks well prepared and like it received a lot of time. And that is not always a one-to-one truth. So something can look really polished and still not receive a lot of time. Overall, when they see that consistently across 8 or 10 or 12 lessons, it's probably a sign you put in a lot of effort and thoughtfulness to planning all of your materials. And so there's a great opportunity to do that in SoftChalk or comparable tools. Then you're going to upload your module. And again, for us, we use Blackboard, but you could use Moodle, you could use another learning management system, you could use a private website. For us, we need to enable an evaluation to link assessment scores from SoftChalk to be reviewed in our Grade Center and Blackboard. And this is one of those spots where, depending on your institution, you may have different experiences. You may not have the tools that can talk to each other the way SoftChalk and Blackboard can. The language that tends to be thrown around is SCORM compliance, and that's SCORM, SCORM compliance. And that tends to be some of the standards, I guess, that allow your kind of module development softwares like SoftChalk to talk to your learning management systems like Blackboard, so that the assessment that's taken in SoftChalk shows up in your gradebook in Blackboard. If you don't have those tools, don't panic. You can easily set up a survey that people complete, and you're just going to have scores that are located somewhere different. And so it might not be as neat and orderly as you want, but you can absolutely get the same end result, which is, I want a list of people who completed this lesson, and how did they score on the assessment. That's always available. You just may have to do it differently. And finally, again, testing for quality assurance. One of the things we did this year is we brought on new staff. We assigned them, for our new professional staff, we assigned them several modules to review. They weren't involved in making it. They weren't involved in any step of it. And so this was all brand new to them, which means they're going to be very sensitive to, if they don't understand what something means, they don't have context for it. And so if we were relying on institutional knowledge, that we were assuming that for us, which is really helpful. I wanted to take a little bit of time and offer a demonstration, and just to give you a sense of what do things look like for us at U of L. And so I'm going to switch screens very quickly, hopefully. Let's see. We're going to go to Blackboard. And so hopefully you're seeing a Blackboard page now. And so I'm going to log in. And when I go to Blackboard, I'm going to see a few different things. I see that I have some classes up here, and that's great. And what I'm looking for specifically is organizations. And so I'm going to go to this campus housing staff page, and that's typically where my student staff are going to find, going to be in this section, the organizations in which they're participating. And so what I'm going to find is, this is set up for me as the administrator for the site. And so I want to show you just a few things that I run into. One, if I go to Grade Center, I have the opportunity to go to a full Grade Center, and I'm not going to, since it has some students' names in there. But that's going to give me the list of all my students who have access to this module. And then it's going to show by column each of the lessons or each of the modules that they've completed and a score. And so I can export that in Excel. I can send that to all the hall supervisors and say, please follow up with your staff. If they haven't completed one of the online trainings, please give them a deadline and I'll send you an update in a couple of days. Or I can give the hall supervisors access to be able to pull the grades themselves directly. What they typically are going to look for is here in training items. And so this is where I normally will be adding lessons or adding modules. And so if I was going to build content, it's pretty easy for me. And again, this is for me at U of L using SoftChalk, using Blackboard. You may have a different experience, but it is not inherently necessary that it is more difficult. So for me, I would go to build content. And then typically what I would use for SoftChalk is I can go into a web link. And what I would do is I would put in the name of the module that I want here. I would paste in a link is provided through SoftChalk. And so I would put that information here. That gives me the opportunity to say this is a link to a tool provider. And then I have the option to enable evaluation. And so when I say yes, that's part of that communication between SoftChalk and Blackboard that allows for scores to be recorded in the gradebook. And then for the specific lesson, I want to put in how many points it's worth. And so it might be 10 points, 12 points, whatever it is for you. You can put in a brief description. So for us, normally what we're putting in is a very brief description of what is the module. And then we're putting in the due date that we want it completed by. And then finally, typically we don't need attachments. We can have the option to open it in a new window. And then when I'm ready, what I'm going to do is click submit. And as soon as I do that, that should post on the training items website. And so if I had posted something, go up here. And so you can see these are ones that we've added previously. And so next what I'll do is I'm going to go into a student mode. And I want you to see just what does the module look like, because that's one of the typical questions we get when we're talking about our training program. So we'll go into student mode. And so if I was a student and I had clicked on campus housing staff, this is where I would start. If I had announcements, I'd see them here, just like in a regular online course or any online course component. I'd go to training items. It would look exactly like we just looked at when I was in the administrator mode. And then I would pick one of these to complete. And so for practical purposes, I'm going to look at residence education model. And we're going to see this open up. And so these are the instructions they get initially. So they get a reminder that there's a finish button on the last page of the module. Make sure you click that when you're done so that we get those scores recorded. And so as I talked about in the presentation, this is an opportunity for branding. And I'm not a marketing expert, but at the very minimum, we went ahead and used our university housing, campus housing logo. We went ahead and said it was for our resident assistant leader training, and we used some of our school colors. And so these are things that were pretty easy to do. And so this is a very typical module for us. It is not a lot of bells and whistles. They're going to find a brief description and instructions so that we want them to watch the videos. And we explain what it's for. This is for our residence education model, or REM. And then they would go ahead and start watching one of the videos. And so they would click play. And so I can hit play real quick and just hit mute. And so this is a video that one of our program coordinators recorded, and I went ahead and turned the sound off just so you can continue to hear me. But this is a PowerPoint that he recorded through Camtasia, most likely. And so he's going through narrating the video and explaining what are we doing in this video. And so in this case, this module was extremely helpful for us because we normally dedicated several hours in our RA training to reviewing our residence education model, how to program, how do we do assessments, what is the paperwork we need to complete, and the vast majority of that have moved to this module. And so if I'm a student, I would watch the entirety of this video, I'd go to the next page, and then I would start answering questions. So for that video, there were 2 questions. So what is not a component of the residence education model? And so I would go back and think, okay, what did I hear? So I'm going to say weekly reports. And what is one reason that the outcomes for REM are what they are? And hopefully if I'm listening, I know the answer. And so I'm going to say help students be happier. And I can go to next. And I have the opportunity to go ahead and check my answers. And so I got 50%, which isn't anything to write home about. So I got question 1 right. I got question 2 wrong. And so I have the opportunity then to retry the test and have the opportunity to correct my answers. Now, what you have the opportunity to do, depending on what kind of tool you're using, is you can really customize a lot of this stuff. So we have chosen just to say, right, good job, sorry, incorrect answer for this assessment. But for some of our other assessments, we've actually added much more answer-specific feedback. So we could have said, right, good job. You do have weekly reports. Those are part of your supervisory meetings, but not a part of REM. So that might give them a friendly reminder. You're not imagining weekly reports. Those actually do exist, but they don't exist in the context of REM. God, help students be happy or wrong. And so it might be helpful for us to edit this feedback to say, sorry, incorrect answer. We of course want our students to be happier and have a great experience, but that's not the foundation of the outcomes of REM that we reviewed in the video. Be thinking about, and so maybe we give them a hint to think about independent living, or if they had answered, prepare them for graduate school, we might say, please remember, not all students are going to go to graduate school. That may not be what they're looking for. And so we could have a good little piece of feedback to remember to have a kind of more inclusive mindset about what are the journeys our students are on. So in any case, when I am able to get, I can go to the next page and I would find that I have my next video. And so this is the event planning guide. And so this reviews all the information that I need to know before I come to campus about how do I plan an event? Like what is involved in that? What are the steps in that? Similarly, I can go to the next page. I would answer my next set of assessment questions, and I'm going to keep working my way through this module. So I get to my next video. So now REM, the lesson plan. So what is the lesson plan? What is that in conjunction to REM? So again, they go through that. And so what you have the ability to do is you can set the expectation and standard for your staff about what completion percentage they have to get correct for your assessments. And so for us, it's 90%. So if they had 10 points worth of questions on this module, they have to get 9 out of 10 right, which is how we can hold them accountable to going back and getting those answers correct. And this is where I would come back to what I shared previously about being conscious of what standard you hold online training to compared to face-to-face training. Because one of the fears I hear from folks that's understandable is, well, what if they just keep clicking through until they get the right answer? And that can happen. That absolutely can happen. I don't know that we have any evidence to be able to prevent that when we're doing face-to-face training. And so it's just something to be conscious of. So again, as we're continuing through, now we're talking about developing learning outcomes. So that means when our staff come back for the fall, we already know they have some familiarity with learning outcomes and Bloom's taxonomy. And so we can start referencing those things as soon as they're here. Looks like for us in our face-to-face training is that when people are coming back, and here's just another example of a different question type, when people are coming back though, we're able to jump right into event planning. We're able to start with what kind of events do you want to do? Here's all the paperwork you need that you already know about. And this is another telling moment for accountability too. If you sit down with your staff group and you find they're unable to navigate the processes, that may give us a hint that maybe they didn't pay as much attention as they need to. And you can reserve the right to challenge them and say, I need you to go back and watch these again and complete the assessments again, because you're not able to perform to the standard that we needed you to perform when you showed up to campus. And so opportunity to also help them understand that you are given some additional flexibility and freedom when you're doing these online trainings. I expect them to receive the same care and attention that they get when you are present and in the room. And so one of the things that I would emphasize for folks as they start down the journey of online learning is also making sure you are set up as a department, that you are prepared to have those types of conversations with your staff, whether they're RAs or office assistants or any other position. Making sure you're ready to have those conversations, because online training can't simply be optional if it's going to be a critical part of your program. And so this is what one of our modules would look like. And we would similarly go through any of these and find a similar thing. This is one I've had a lot of conversations about for our colleagues about writing incident reports, because we know how important writing incident reports are and is. And at the same time, it's something that can take a lot of time, and it's hard to make it exceptionally engaging and more effective. And so this is a really simple way for us. We can give them access to the incident reporting form right here. We can have them go through the 2 videos that we have and the 2 assessments we have, and we can ask them again to go to that link and provide it to them at the end and say, please write us a sample incident report about this video clip that we give you. And so one year, our program coordinator for student rights and responsibilities used a clip from Harry Potter and said, write an incident report about this. And so that's a simple way for us to get incident reports. We can forward them to hall supervisors, and hall supervisors can provide feedback. And so they're getting all that feedback before they ever arrive, or they get the feedback when they arrive. And that's still helpful rather than trying to fit all of that in when everybody is together. the very basic piece of what our system looks like. And we're going to switch back over to PowerPoint, hopefully. And let's see. So we're back in PowerPoint. And so I want to just kind of wrap up real quick to give you time for question and answers as well as we approach the hour. These are a few common questions that I've gotten. So what if my staff are paid hourly? And that's definitely a thing, and that's real. First and foremost, I would say even if your staff aren't paid hourly, one of the first things I've done whenever I've introduced online training is we've done outreach to our human resources team to make sure we have their opinion about impact our various staff groups. And we know RAs are oftentimes a very unique population, but what about someone who's a less unique population, such as someone who just works hourly for $7.75 an hour? What does this mean for them? And what I would say is if you're required to pay them for the online training time, I'd encourage you to do it, because what we have found is that we still save so much time compared to doing it face-to-face, because you don't hit any of the delays of having to move people around during the day. You don't have any of the lags in terms of changing presenters, changing slideshows, all that sort of stuff. They can just kind of go through the training uninterrupted. And so we have found it worthwhile, even if we needed to pay someone hourly. In addition, you can bring folks back and maybe just set time aside in face-to-face training for them to go do the online training. And so, yeah, you're still paying for meals, but you may still be able to fit more training into the online viewing that your staff are doing all in one room. So I would say utilize your human resources, whoever you would work with. If you have human resources in your department, if they are elsewhere on campus, what are your responsibilities? Because we of course want to be good, ethical employers and do right by all of our students. So where did I find my online training tools? So I started with the online learning programs here at U of L. And so I said, what do we have? How do faculty members at U of L teach these courses? And they were able to provide me a number of options. Some that I said, this doesn't work for me. I'm sure it works great for them. And some that worked great. And I was fortunate to find some partners who were very willing to help coach me as I wanted to do. And so this is now the second or third campuses where I've tried to implement some piece of this, and we're continuing to make some of that progress. And then finally, can I see more of your examples? Yes, absolutely. This is my email address. Please help yourself and reach out to me. As I said at the beginning, please consider me a friend, a colleague, a resource, whatever language you prefer. I am happy to help folks. Our videos are not top secret. And my challenge to you is what I have shown you is the tip of the iceberg realistically. I believe there are places that are probably doing it better that I just haven't seen. And I believe there are probably lots of people watching right now who are saying we can do better than this. And my challenge to you is please do so. I think it's good for your staff. And if it's good for your staff, it's good for us collectively. And so I hope that you can find some value in this and also see opportunities to say, I have a better idea. And I would love to hear what that is, because I also want our trainings to get better. So those are some of the pieces that I wanted to share today. That I wanted to say thank you again to Northwest NWACUHO. I want to say thank you for everybody who's out there who's listening or who listens later. Please, again, feel free to utilize my email. Help yourself to contact me. I'll fully own if I just don't have an answer to something, but I'll always try and help you either find a resource that works for you or put you in contact with someone who knows better than I do. And beyond that, I'd really like to invite any questions that you have.
There we go. Great. Thank you very much. That was a fantastic presentation. We do actually have a couple of questions that have come in the chat window here. The first one you sort of touched on, but I'll ask you to expand on it a little bit more. Do you consider this paid work if it's before people arrive to campus? And how do you navigate asking for work before they're actually on their contract?
So really good question. And as I alluded to, I'd start with human resources. I would start with them to get their interpretation of, I'm going to use RAs as the example again. Well, I know lots of campuses are always dealing with this question. What are my RAs? Are they employees? Are they student leaders? Are they interns? What is the answer? And the answer seems to shift pretty regularly. And so I think you put all of that out there. So this is their official start date. Can we require them to do this before they come back to campus? And if the answer is no, that's okay. Online training may still have a lot of value for you. Maybe you use it in place of an in-service model, if that's an option for you. Maybe you use it for something to complement your regular evening staff meetings. Or again, maybe you use your traditional fall and spring training period, but you set aside 2 or 3 hours where you say, I'm giving you this time back. You are responsible when you come back tomorrow to have reviewed these modules. And if you believe that you can cover material more efficiently and more effectively in that same time period online, then you may be able to get some gains out of that. Even if you don't get the massive gains of being able to cut 3 or 4 days out of training, you might be able to cut 1. And so my experience is that by putting more of the onus on the students to review the material and work with their supervisor if they have a question, it empowers them to be able to really build their skill set a little bit. And so we have found with writing incident reports, people are able to come in, and so I'll use spring semester. We were able to use this to complement our spring semester training this past year, was that for our new students who came in, we had 10 or 12 new RAs, they rolled right in with this incident report writing module and they didn't have a problem. I remember looking at someone's first one and being like, this is a really good incident report. This is a model incident report. Now, maybe that RA was going to be a rock star anyway, and so I don't want to overread what online training did, but it certainly didn't set him up to fail. And I think that was a good sign for us. And so to answer the question, work with HR. If you have an hourly position, yeah, you're probably going to have to pay for it. I still think you're going to get some time saving, which means you get some cost saving. And so I think you just have to work with the constraints that you have, but this is still definitely applicable. And even if you want to use this just as a good, helpful resource in the long run of, hey, it's November, we haven't talked about some of these things in a while, I want you to go review all of these during the year. That may be your other option too, because how many times do we have someone who's an RA in a building that has very low conduct, and so they haven't written an incident report since the beginning of August. It's now November and they haven't written one. It might be helpful for them to go and spend 20 minutes kind of reviewing all of this so that they're still fresh when inevitably they get that next incident report in 2 weeks.
Great, thank you. The next question we had on the list is, do you have any university requirements for your online branding and voice?
So for online branding, we have not gotten any pushback from our organization in terms of how we use that. And I suspect part of the reason is it's also predominantly private since it's all running through our Blackboard page. Again, the YouTube videos are all on an unlisted channel, and so we don't expect that those are getting much traffic. And so that has not come up for us. It is something, again, to be very aware of what institution are you at? Because certainly some institutions, they get really protective all the way down to what color are you using, and is it the right shade of the right color? And so that can be a thing, and it's something, again, to know about your campus and kind of seeking to understand that. So we have not particularly run into an issue of either the branding or the concept of the voice. Admittedly, we are probably a little further out than some of our peers in terms of student staff training in this area. And so ask me in a few years as this starts to pick up a little bit more, we may have an entirely new practice that we have to follow about what material goes out there. But up to this point, no, it hasn't been an issue for us.
All right, that's great. Now the next question we have is, what is the length of the entire online training?
For us this year, because we are adding some additional content, I want to say the runtime for all of our videos, the last time I had pulled it, and we have some ones that we need to add, I suspect you take the video itself and allow some amount of time for the assessment, but you saw the assessment questions have taken off a lot of time. I would liberally say maybe 6 or 7 hours. And again, we've got a few things that are still floating around, and so that might push us more. I would be stunned if it's taking our team longer than that. I mean, unless they are going back and watching something multiple times, which in full transparency, I don't think is happening. If it is, then I'm grateful they're using the resources. But for us, I mean, it's certainly under a business day at this point.
All right, that's fantastic. We just have one final comment that says somebody just loved the idea of using movie clips as a tool for writing IRs. So that about sums up all the questions that I've seen in the chat window. Once again, thank you so much for sharing your information with us, Justin. This was a fantastic session and very timely, as I know a lot of our colleagues are currently working on their own training programs right now. So this is a really great resource for them. I will ask that folks remember to fill out the evaluation. If you're viewing on YouTube, the link to that evaluation will be popping up in the chat window very shortly. And other than that, thank you all for joining us on what is hopefully a wonderful July day. I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend. And thanks again, Justin, for joining us today. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.